Big Shaq wiped the sweat from his forehead as he parked his old Honda Civic in the far corner of the Westfield Mall parking lot. Nobody would expect to see him in this beat-up car instead of his usual luxury SUV. That was exactly the point. Today, he wasn't Big Shaq the millionaire businessman. Today, he was just another shopper. The mall didn't look great from the outside. Faded signs, cracked pavement, and only a handful of cars in what should be a busy Saturday afternoon. Shaq sighed. He'd spent nearly everything he had to buy this place last month. The previous owners had promised it was a diamond in the rough, but right now it looked more rough than diamond. Shaq pulled his baseball cap lower and adjusted his plain hoodie. The casual clothes felt strange after years of wearing suits to work. He caught his reflection in the car window and hardly recognized himself. Perfect. Nobody would know he owned the entire building. Time to see what I actually bought, he muttered, pocketing his keys. Walking through the main entrance, the smell hit him first. A mix of cheap cleaning products trying to cover up something worse. The floor tiles were dirty with several cracked ones that nobody had bothered to replace. Music played from speakers that buzzed with static. This place was in worse shape than the reports had shown. Near the entrance, 5 teenagers in baggy clothes were shouting and pushing each other around. Shoppers walked in wide circles to avoid them. Shaq looked around for security but saw nobody. Where were the guards he was paying for? An old woman clutching her purse hurried past the teenagers, looking nervous. One of the boys made a sudden movement toward her, and she flinched, walking faster. The boys laughed. Shaq felt his blood pressure rising, but reminded himself he was here to observe, not intervene. Not yet, anyway. He wandered deeper into the mall, pulling out a small notebook. The food court was half empty with 3 boarded-up stalls. In one corner, a mop bucket had been abandoned, the dirty water giving off a sour smell. Shaq scribbled notes, his face growing more concerned with each new problem he discovered. This place is a mess, he whispered to himself, counting the empty storefronts. The rental reports claimed the mall was at 70% capacity, but it looked closer to 50%. Someone had been lying to him. In the West Wing, water dripped steadily from a brown stain in the ceiling. Shaq pulled out his phone and started taking photos of the leak. This was dangerous. Someone could slip and get hurt. He'd need to get maintenance on this right away. As he zoomed in on the ceiling damage, he felt someone tap his shoulder. Turning around, he faced a stern-looking security guard with a fresh haircut and a uniform that seemed one size too big. "Excuse me, sir. No photography allowed in the mall," the guard said firmly. His name tag read, Officer P. Johnson. Shaq lowered his phone. "I'm just taking pictures of this leak. It's pretty bad." The guard crossed his arms. "I understand, but it's still against mall policy. You'll need to delete those photos." "Look, this is a safety hazard," Shaq explained, pointing up at the dripping ceiling. "Someone needs to fix this." Johnson's eyes narrowed. "Are you from the city inspector's office? Because management needs to be notified about any inspections." "No, I'm not an inspector, I'm—" Shaq started to explain but stopped himself. He was curious how the guard would handle this situation if he didn't know who Shaq really was. "Then I'll have to ask you to delete those photos, sir," Johnson insisted. "We've had problems with people taking pictures to plan break-ins." Shaq noticed the teenagers from the entrance were now throwing food at each other near the pretzel stand. Nobody was stopping them. "Shouldn't he be more worried about those kids causing trouble over there?" Shaq asked, pointing toward the commotion. Johnson glanced over his shoulder and sighed. "Look, I'm just doing my job. The photos, please." Shaq stood his ground. "There's something seriously wrong with this place if you're more worried about me taking pictures of a leak than actual troublemakers." The guard's face hardened. He reached for his radio. "This is Johnson. I need backup at the West Corridor. Got someone refusing to comply with mall policies." Shaq couldn't believe what was happening. He was about to get thrown out of his own mall. 2 more security guards came rushing down the corridor just minutes after Johnson had called for backup. One was tall and skinny with a patchy beard, while the other was shorter with a round face that looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. They both wore the same ill-fitting uniforms as Johnson. "What's the problem here?" asked the taller guard, slightly out of breath. Johnson pointed at Shaq. "This gentleman is taking unauthorized photos of the mall and refusing to delete them." Shaq put his hands up. Look, I'm just trying to document that leak before someone gets hurt. He pointed to the ceiling where water continued to drip onto the floor. A small puddle had formed, with no wet floor sign in sight. The shorter guard glanced up at the ceiling and frowned. That does look pretty bad. That's not the point, Rivera, Johnson said sharply. Mall policy clearly states no photography without management approval. Shaq tried again. Can I speak to the manager then? This is ridiculous. Manager's not in on weekends, the tall guard said with a shrug. You'll have to come back Monday. Shaq couldn't believe what he was hearing. The mall manager wasn't even present during the busiest shopping days. No wonder this place was falling apart. Meanwhile, Johnson continued, I need you to delete those photos and move along, or we'll have to escort you out. People were starting to stare now. A small crowd had gathered, watching the confrontation with curious eyes. Some had their phones out, probably recording the whole thing. Great, Shaq thought, this would make for some interesting social media posts. Fine, Shaq said, opening his photo gallery. I'll delete them. He pretended to delete the photos, but actually just closed the app. He wasn't about to get rid of evidence of how badly this place was being maintained. These photos would be useful when he met with the management team on Monday. There, happy now? Shaq said, showing Johnson his phone screen. Johnson nodded, but his face remained stern. Thank you for your cooperation. Now I need to ask you to leave the premises. Wait, what? Shaq said, genuinely surprised. I deleted the photos. Why do I still need to leave? You were uncooperative and caused a disturbance, Johnson replied stiffly. Mall policy gives us the right to remove anyone causing problems. The crowd had grown larger. The teenagers from earlier had wandered over to watch, snickering and pointing. One of them was filming with his phone. This is crazy, Shaq said, looking around at the growing audience. I'm getting kicked out for trying to report a safety hazard, while those kids, he pointed to the teenagers, have been bothering shoppers all afternoon, and nobody does anything about it. The shorter guard, Rivera, looked uncomfortable. Maybe we could just give him a warning this time, Johnson. Rules are rules, Johnson insisted. We need to escort him out. Shaq noticed an elderly couple carefully stepping around the puddle from the leaky ceiling. The old man nearly slipped but caught himself on his wife's arm. Still no security guard moved to put up a wet floor sign or call maintenance. You know what? Fine, Shaq said, raising his voice slightly so the crowd could hear. I'll leave, but someone should really fix that leak before someone gets hurt. And maybe focus on actual troublemakers instead of people trying to help. The three guards formed a triangle around Shaq and began walking him toward the exit. It was humiliating. Him, the owner of the entire mall, being marched out like a common troublemaker. As they passed the food court, Shaq noticed more problems: broken chairs, overflowing trash cans, another closed store with a handwritten out of business sign taped to the window. The place was in even worse shape than he'd realized. When they reached the main entrance, Johnson stepped in front of Shaq and spoke in a low voice. Don't come back today, sir. If there's a problem with the mall, there are proper channels to report it. Oh, I'll be reporting it all right, Shaq replied. More than you know. The guards watched as Shaq walked across the parking lot to his old Honda. He got in, slammed the door, and sat there for a moment, taking deep breaths to calm himself. Well, he said to himself as he started the engine, at least now I know exactly what needs fixing around here. He pulled out his phone and sent a quick text to his assistant, call emergency meeting with all mall staff. Monday morning, 8 a.m. sharp. He smiled to himself as he drove away. Officer Johnson and the security team were in for quite a surprise. Monday morning arrived with gray skies and light rain. Johnson pulled into the employee parking lot 15 minutes before his shift started, just like he always did. He sipped his coffee and watched as other mall employees hurried inside, hunched against the drizzle. Something felt different today. There were too many cars in the lot for a Monday morning. Johnson's phone buzzed with a text from Rivera. Emergency meeting in the conference room. Everyone. Boss says mandatory. Strange. They rarely had all-staff meetings and never first thing Monday. Johnson finished his coffee, straightened his uniform, and headed inside. The conference room was packed. Security guards, maintenance staff, cleaners, and administrative workers all crammed into the space, whispering to each other. Johnson spotted Rivera waving him over to a seat he'd saved. "Any idea what this is about?" Johnson asked, settling in beside his colleague. Rivera shrugged. "No clue. But the mall manager looks like he's about to pass out." Johnson glanced toward the front of the room where the mall manager, a balding man with a permanent worried expression, was frantically shuffling papers. Next to him was an empty chair, presumably for whoever had called this meeting. At exactly 8 a.m., the door opened and the room fell silent. Johnson's jaw dropped. Walking in was the man he kicked out of the mall on Saturday, except now he wore an expensive suit instead of a hoodie and baseball cap. "Good morning, everyone," the man said, his voice confident and commanding. "For those who don't know me, I'm Big Shaq, the new owner of Westfield Mall. Some of you," his eyes found Johnson's, "might recognize me from my visit this weekend." Whispers erupted around the room. Johnson felt his face burning. He'd kicked out the owner? His stomach twisted into a tight knot. Rivera elbowed him gently, eyes wide. "That's the guy," he whispered. "Oh man, you're toast." Big Shaq raised his hand, and the room quieted again. "I spent Saturday afternoon seeing this mall through the eyes of a regular visitor. What I found was disappointing, to say the least." He clicked a remote, and photos appeared on the wall screen: peeling paint, broken tiles, the leaking ceiling, overflowing trash cans, the rowdy teenagers harassing shoppers. Johnson sank lower in his seat with each new image. "This mall has serious problems," Big Shaq continued. "But what concerned me most was our approach to security and customer safety." Here it comes, Johnson thought. He'd be fired in front of everyone. He imagined cleaning out his locker, telling his mother he'd lost another job, facing the bills piling up at home. "Officer Johnson," Big Shaq called out. "Would you stand up, please?" The room went completely silent. Johnson felt like his legs were made of concrete as he slowly rose to his feet. "Officer Johnson here followed mall policy to the letter on Saturday," Big Shaq said. "He'd found someone taking photos, which is against the rules, and he acted accordingly." Johnson blinked in confusion. This wasn't going how he expected. "The problem," Big Shaq continued, "isn't Officer Johnson. The problem is the policies themselves." He clicked to a new slide showing the mall's security priorities list. Photography violations were ranked higher than customer harassment. "We've created a system where documenting a dangerous leak is considered worse than allowing teenagers to intimidate elderly shoppers," Big Shaq said, shaking his head. "Our priorities are completely backward." Johnson remained standing, unsure if he should sit down. Big Shaq motioned for him to stay up. "Officer Johnson, tell me something. If you could change how security operates in this mall, what would you do differently?" Johnson swallowed hard. Was this a trick? But looking into Big Shaq's eyes, he saw genuine interest. So he took a deep breath and spoke from his heart. "We need more staff, sir. We're stretched too thin to cover the whole mall properly. And our priorities should be customer safety first, not just protecting property. Those kids hanging around the entrance, we've been told to leave them alone unless they damage something. But they scare away customers every day." Big Shaq nodded encouragingly. "What else?" Gaining confidence, Johnson continued. "The maintenance issues make our job harder too. That leaking ceiling you photographed, we've reported it 5 times in the last month. Nobody fixes anything around here." Other staff members began nodding in agreement. Someone from maintenance called out, "We don't have the budget for repairs." "Exactly," Big Shaq said. "And that all changes today." He laid out a new vision for the mall: more security staff, better training, a renovation budget, and most surprisingly, a youth program to give local teenagers something constructive to do instead of loitering. And to oversee these security changes, Big Shaq announced, "I'm creating a new position, Director of Security and Customer Safety." He turned to Johnson. "I'd like you to take on this role." Johnson's mouth fell open. "Me? But I kicked you out of your own mall." Big Shaq smiled. "You did your job based on the rules you were given. Now I'm giving you new rules and the authority to make this place safe for everyone." As the meeting continued, Johnson remained standing, stunned by this unexpected turn of events. The owner he'd ejected was now promoting him. Sometimes life took the strangest turns. After the meeting ended, Johnson sat alone in the conference room, still trying to wrap his head around what had just happened. His hands trembled slightly as he looked down at the business card Big Shaq had given him. Director of Security and Customer Safety was printed beneath his name, along with a salary figure that made his eyes widen. It was more than double what he currently made. The door opened and Big Shaq walked back in, carrying 2 cups of coffee. He handed one to Johnson. "You look like you could use this," he said with a smile, sitting down across from him. "Thank you, sir," Johnson replied, taking a sip. "I still don't understand. Why me?" "I kicked you out of your own mall." Big Shaq leaned back in his chair. "Because you stood your ground. You were following the rules, even when faced with someone challenging your authority. That shows integrity." "But I was wrong," Johnson said, staring into his coffee. "No, the policies were wrong," Big Shaq corrected. "And when I asked for your honest opinion, you gave it. No sugarcoating, no telling me what you thought I wanted to hear. That's rare." Johnson nodded slowly. "So what happens now?" "Now?" Big Shaq grinned. "Now we fix this place, and I want you to lead the security overhaul." He pulled out a notebook and slid it across the table. "I need a complete security plan by the end of the week. Staffing needs, equipment, training, everything. Budget isn't unlimited, but it's a lot more than you've been working with." Johnson flipped through the empty pages, feeling the weight of responsibility. "I've never done anything like this before." "Sometimes the best person for a job is someone who hasn't learned all the wrong ways to do it," Big Shaq replied. "Fresh eyes. That's what this place needs." Before Johnson could respond, his phone buzzed. It was a text from Rivera. "Juby, will we hate APPENETI there? Are you fired?" Johnson couldn't help but laugh. "My team is probably wondering if I still have a job." Big Shaq checked his watch. "Tell you what, why don't you take the rest of the day to process all this? Start fresh tomorrow. Your new office is being prepared as we speak." "My own office?" Johnson repeated, amazed. "Can't have the director of security working from a closet in the basement," Big Shaq said. "Go home, tell your family the good news, and come back tomorrow ready to work." Johnson stood up, still dazed. "I won't let you down, sir." "I know you won't," Big Shaq said confidently. As Johnson walked through the mall toward the exit, he saw everything differently now. The cracked tiles weren't just eyesores, they were safety hazards. The broken security cameras weren't just equipment failures, they were vulnerabilities. The groups of teenagers weren't just nuisances, they were potential customers being ignored. Outside, the rain had stopped and sunlight broke through the clouds. A perfect metaphor for how he felt. Johnson pulled out his phone and called his mother. "Hey Ma," he said when she answered, "you're not going to believe what happened today." After explaining everything to his shocked but thrilled mother, Johnson drove home with his mind racing. Ideas for improving mall security filled his thoughts. Better lighting in the parking lot, security desks at all major entrances, regular patrols through all corridors, a proper camera system that actually worked. At home, he cleared off his kitchen table and started making notes. Before he knew it, pages were filled with ideas, sketches, and plans. Hours passed unnoticed. That evening, as he heated up leftovers for dinner, his doorbell rang. When Johnson opened the door, he found a large package with a note attached. "Thought you might need these to get started." Big Shaq. Inside were security manuals, industry journals, and a brand new laptop. Johnson smiled as he placed everything on his already crowded table. The mall owner could have easily fired him for what happened on Saturday. Instead, he'd seen something in Johnson that Johnson hadn't even seen in himself. For the first time in years, Johnson felt truly excited about his work. Tomorrow couldn't come soon enough. As he prepared for bed that night, Johnson paused to look at himself in the mirror. Same face, same person, but everything had changed in just one day. From security guard to director of security, from just following rules to making them. "Don't mess this up," he told his reflection firmly. "This is your one big chance." He set his alarm for 5 a.m. He wanted to be first to arrive at the mall tomorrow. After all, he had a security plan to create, a team to build, and a mall to transform. The work was just beginning. The next month flew by in a blur of activity. Johnson arrived at the mall every morning before sunrise, often staying until the cleaning crews came in after closing. His new office, formerly a storage room near the main entrance, was covered in blueprints, security plans, and sticky notes. The wastebasket overflowed with coffee cups and sandwich wrappers. "You need to go home sometime," Rivera said, poking his head through the doorway one evening. Johnson had promoted his friend to assistant director, and they'd been working non-stop implementing the changes Big Shaq had approved. Johnson rubbed his tired eyes. "Just want to finish reviewing these job applications. We've got interviews tomorrow." Rivera stepped into the office and sat down. "The mall actually feels different already. Did you see those teenagers who used to cause trouble? They were helping set up the game room today." Johnson nodded. That had been his idea, converting an empty storefront into a supervised recreation area for local kids. Give them somewhere to belong instead of just chasing them away. Big Shaq approved the budget for 10 more guards too, Johnson said, holding up the email. "We can finally have coverage in all sections without working everyone to death." Rivera grinned. "Remember how we used to complain about this place? Now we're fixing it." After Rivera left, Johnson walked through the mall one final time before heading home. Workers were installing new security cameras, their ladders and tools scattered beneath them. The leaky ceiling had been repaired the day after the meeting with Big Shaq. Fresh paint covered the walls, and the broken tiles had been replaced with new ones. Shoppers were noticing too. Johnson overheard a woman telling her friend, "This place used to be so rundown. Wonder what changed." It wasn't just the physical improvements. Johnson had implemented a new customer-first approach for the security team. Guards now greeted visitors, helped carry packages, and gave directions instead of just watching for troublemakers. The whole atmosphere had shifted. At the main entrance, Johnson spotted a familiar face, the elderly woman who had clutched her purse in fear of the rowdy teenagers a month ago. Now she chatted comfortably with one of the new security guards, a friendly woman who'd previously worked at the airport. "Evening, ma'am," Johnson said as he approached. "How are you finding the mall these days?" The old woman smiled broadly. "Much better, young man. I actually feel safe coming here again. My friends are even joining me for lunch tomorrow." Johnson felt a swell of pride as he walked to his car. This was what success looked like, not just in numbers and budgets, but in real people feeling the difference. At home, Johnson collapsed onto his couch, too tired to even make dinner. His phone buzzed with a text from Big Shaq. "Monthly report looks excellent. Customer complaints down 60%. Want to discuss your ideas for the community outreach program tomorrow?" Johnson texted back a quick confirmation. The community outreach had been his most ambitious proposal, partnering with local schools and youth organizations to make the mall a gathering place for positive activities. Big Shaq had seemed enthusiastic but cautious about the costs. The next morning, Johnson met Big Shaq at the coffee shop in the mall's food court. The place was busier than Johnson had ever seen it, with nearly every table occupied. "Look at this," Big Shaq said, gesturing around. "Just a month ago, you could fire a cannon through here and not hit anyone." Johnson nodded. "Store owners are reporting sales up almost 30% across the board." "And security incidents?" Big Shaq asked. "Down by half," Johnson replied proudly. "Turns out when people feel safe and welcome, they behave better." "Canoe." Big Shaq laughed. "So tell me about this community program." Johnson pulled out his tablet and showed Big Shaq his plans. Weekend workshops for kids, job fairs for teenagers, a walking club for seniors. The mall had empty spaces during off hours that could be put to good use. "The best security isn't just about keeping bad things out," Johnson explained. "It's about inviting good things in." Big Shaq studied the proposal, his expression thoughtful. "This goes way beyond what I expected when I gave you this job." Johnson froze. Had he overstepped? Gone too far too fast? Then Big Shaq broke into a wide smile. "It's exactly what this place needs. Let's do it." As they shook hands, Johnson couldn't help but think how different things might have been if he hadn't kicked the owner out of his own mall that Saturday. Sometimes the biggest mistakes led to the best opportunities. 3 months after Johnson's promotion, Westfield Mall was almost unrecognizable. The once empty parking lot now filled up by mid-morning. Store owners who had been thinking about breaking their leases were now extending them instead. Even the food court, once a sad collection of half-closed stalls and sticky floors, bustled with activity. "You actually want to eat here now," Rivera joked as he and Johnson grabbed lunch one busy Tuesday. "Remember when we used to drive 10 minutes away just to avoid the food here?" Johnson nodded, watching a group of teenagers, the same ones who used to cause trouble by the entrance, helping younger kids with a robotics project in the community space he'd created from an empty storefront. "Still can't believe those kids turned out to be so helpful," Rivera said, following Johnson's gaze. All they needed was something better to do. Johnson's community programs had been surprisingly successful. The weekend workshops filled up almost immediately. Senior citizens came for morning mall walks before the stores opened. Local schools booked field trips to the educational events Johnson organized with store owners. "Got a minute?" Big Shaq appeared at their table, holding a stack of papers. "Always," Johnson replied, clearing space. Rivera excused himself, taking his lunch to go. Big Shaq sat down, looking pleased. "Just got the quarterly numbers. Foot traffic is up 45% compared to last year. Store revenue is up almost 40%, and vacancy rate is down from 35% to just 8%. Johnson couldn't help but smile. The security improvements helped, but it's the community engagement that's really making the difference. People feel connected to this place now. "That's exactly what I wanted to talk to you about," Big Shaq said, sliding a folder across the table. "I've been approached by the owners of Riverside Mall across town. They're struggling with the same issues we had. They want to know our secret." Johnson flipped through the folder, photos of another rundown mall with empty storefronts, dirty floors, and bored security guards staring at their phones. "Looks familiar," Johnson said. "Like our place 3 months ago." Big Shaq leaned forward. "They've asked me to consult. I told them I'd bring my security director, the real brains behind our turnaround." Johnson nearly choked on his drink. "Me, consult for another mall? Why not? You're the expert now." Big Shaq grinned. "They'll pay well for your time. Plus, I'm thinking bigger. What we've done here could work anywhere. Shopping centers all over the country are dying because they don't understand what you figured out. Malls need to be community spaces, not just places to shop." Later that afternoon, Johnson walked through his mall, looking at everything with fresh eyes. The new mother's room he'd suggested was being used by a tired-looking woman with twins. The information desk, now staffed by friendly faces instead of bored teenagers, had a line of people asking questions. 2 of his security guards were helping an elderly man who had dropped his packages. His phone buzzed with a text from his mother. "Just saw the newspaper article about the mall turnaround. So proud of you. They even used your photo." Johnson hadn't seen the article yet, but it didn't surprise him that word was getting out. Other business owners had been visiting, trying to figure out why Westfield was thriving while other malls struggled. The answer was simple, really. They'd put people first. Near the main entrance, Johnson paused to watch a group of high school students setting up for the job fair he'd organized. Tomorrow, 20 local businesses would interview teenagers for part-time positions and summer internships. "Mr. Johnson," called one of the teens, a tall boy who'd once been among the troublemakers. "We finished setting up the tables. Anything else you need?" "Looks perfect," Johnson replied. "Thanks for your help." The boy grinned. "No problem. My mom's got an interview tomorrow. She's been out of work for months. Really hoping she gets something." A lump formed in Johnson's throat. This was why all the hard work mattered. Real people with real lives were being impacted. Back in his office, Johnson found a handwritten note on his desk. "Remember when you kicked me out of my own mall? Best thing that ever happened to this place. Meeting at 4 to discuss the Riverside project." Big shock. Johnson smiled, tucking the note into his desk drawer. 3 months ago, he'd been a security guard following bad policies. Now he was being asked to share his expertise with other failing malls. Life took the strangest turns sometimes, all because he'd kicked the wrong guy out of the mall. 6 months to the day after Johnson had kicked Big Shaq out of his own mall, they stood together on a small stage in the central courtyard. A crowd had gathered for the mall's official grand reopening celebration, even though the place had never actually closed. Local news cameras pointed at them, and a red ribbon stretched across the stage, waiting to be cut. Johnson tugged nervously at his new suit collar. He'd spent his entire adult life avoiding attention, and now here he was, about to give a speech to hundreds of people. "Relax," Big Shaq whispered. "Just tell them what you told me that first day in my office. Speak from the heart." The mayor, standing nearby, stepped up to the microphone first. "What's happened at Westfield Mall is nothing short of miraculous," she said. "A year ago, we were discussing condemning parts of this building. Today, it's a model for shopping centers across the country." Johnson watched the crowd as the mayor spoke. Store owners stood proudly in front of their shops. The teenagers who once caused trouble were now wearing volunteer t-shirts, helping direct people to their seats. His security team, doubled in size and sporting new uniforms, maintained a friendly presence throughout the mall. His mother sat in the front row, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. Next to her was his sister with her 2 kids, all of them beaming with pride. "And now," the mayor continued, "I'd like to introduce the man behind this incredible transformation. 6 months ago, he was a security guard. Today, he's changed how we think about what a mall can be. Please welcome our Director of Security and Community Engagement, Mr. Johnson." The applause caught Johnson by surprise. He stepped forward, his hands shaking slightly as he adjusted the microphone. "Thank you," he began, his voice a bit unsteady. "But I'm not the hero of this story. The real heroes are the people standing in front of me, the store owners who stuck with us through tough times, the community members who embraced our programs, and the young people who showed us that sometimes what looks like a problem is actually an opportunity in disguise." As he spoke, Johnson found his confidence growing. He talked about the importance of making spaces that welcomed everyone, about safety being more than just rules and cameras, about how real security came from community connection. 6 months ago, Johnson said, glancing at Big Shaq with a smile, "I actually kicked our owner out of his own mall for taking pictures of a leaky ceiling. I was following the rules, but I was missing the bigger picture." The crowd laughed, and Big Shaq gave a good-natured shrug. "That mistake could have cost me my job," Johnson continued. "Instead, it taught me the most important lesson of my career. Sometimes the rules themselves are the problem. We needed to rethink everything about how this mall operated and who it served." After his speech, Johnson and Big Shaq cut the ribbon together. Confetti rained down as the crowd cheered. Local business leaders swarmed Big Shaq afterward, eager to learn more about their successful model. A reporter pushed through the crowd to reach Johnson. "You've consulted for 3 other malls now, and they're all seeing similar turnarounds. What's next for you?" Before Johnson could answer, he noticed a commotion by the east entrance. He excused himself and made his way through the crowd. There, he found one of his newer security guards arguing with an older man in shabby clothes who was taking photos of a display window. "Sir, photography isn't allowed without permission," the guard was saying. Johnson stepped between them. "Actually," he said gently to the guard, "that policy changed months ago." He turned to the visitor. "Feel free to take all the pictures you want. Is there anything I can help you with today?" The man lowered his camera. "Just admiring the place. I used to come here as a kid, then stopped when it got run down. Heard it was nice again, so thought I'd see for myself." Johnson smiled and offered his hand. "Welcome back, sir. We're glad to have you." As he walked the man toward the information desk, pointing out new features along the way, Johnson caught Big Shaq watching from a distance, nodding in approval. 6 months ago, kicking someone out had changed Johnson's life. Today, welcoming someone improved. He learned the most valuable lesson of all. Every person who walked through those doors mattered, whether they were taking photos, shopping, or just looking for a place to belong. That's what had saved them all. Not rules or cameras or fancy renovations, but remembering that spaces were for people. All kinds of people. Even mall owners in disguise.